round 5, round 6, 512, 601 turn. Thus far in the Hormel division, we are 21 QBs in, 15 running backs have been drafted, 15 receivers have been drafted, 8 tight ends have been drafted thus far. I'm sitting at the 512. Team to date, if you followed along, started with Josh Allen, went Daniel Jones at 212. Realized Josh Allen and Daniel Jones have the same bye, which I did not check. Guilty as charged. Third round reversal, ended up taking Geno Smith. Thought it was a tier break at QB. There have been 4 QBs that have gotten taken since then, so a little bit of a push. And then at the 401, I took Ramondre Stevenson. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do here. Was considering potentially taking Dallas Goedert if he would have fallen, but got sniped. But don't have any sort of correlation with Dallas Goedert at all. I actually thought Josh would take Dallas Goedert at the 5-10, but he did not. Opted for DK Metcalf. Obviously, I've been drafting this team based entirely off of WoRP. Here's the chart. Not going to take a quarterback at this point, obviously, because I already have 3. Tight end, in my opinion, pretty much out. I'll bring the tight ends just so everybody can see it. But tight ends, clearly, if you don't get one of the elite ones, the WoRP's just not worth it. We're already here. This is last year, tight end 8, David Njoku, 0.73 WoRP. Just not worth taking. As you see, at this point going forward, the wins over replacement is just really flat, not really worth taking. I'll probably just punt tight end in this format, barring that someone doesn't fall drastically below probably where I think they should go. So we'll take away the tight ends. Here's the WoRP graph. I'll just say, from what I've seen on Twitter, what I've seen other people doing thus far, it's shocking how many receivers have been taken early. Shocking that as many receivers have been taken as running backs in this draft. And it'll be interesting to see how people plan to roster construct with this, because this is literally the running back versus wide receiver WoRP distribution from last year in this format. At no point, especially based on the ADP, would it ever make sense to take a receiver, at least in this range. And you look at that and you say, okay, well, this is obviously in a lineup league, you have to set lineups. WoRP is a little bit different in a lineup league with running backs because it's just so hit or miss. The distribution is going to be inflated because obviously the WoRP is going to be captured by the players that are in starting lineups, which tends to be a little more efficient, especially like in these ranges and below. But even so, the scoring is just so favorable here to running backs. It makes it hard for me to justify taking a receiver. So we'll pop over here to what's available in our league overall. Here's the best player available. Make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. Smitty's still sitting there. Highest ADP left, 47.7. Could take him, but you go back to the WoRP tool, you're looking at Smitty's probably somewhere in this range, right? You're talking about quarter of a win over replacement, maybe a little higher. Maybe there's the upside to get up here, potentially. Last year is at 0.87. Like, that's probably the ceiling of where you'd probably think he would end up. And then everybody else, there's a few other receivers, but I think he's probably the one in a tier that you would consider. We're running backs, though. These are the running backs. Now, ADP's pretty fluid. Basically, these 5 all going off in the same range. Aaron Jones, Ken Walker, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, Dameon Pierce. J.K. Dobbins is out, has the same bye as my quarterback, so I just can't afford to draft another Week 13 bye player. But then you look back at the WoRP chart and the roster construction tab, which we'll calculate here in just a second. There you go. So for this, given that it's 22-man rosters, here's the roster construction. Now, it only says 5 running backs, basically, if you interpret this as 5, but I said in the first video, in the round 1 show, that I plan to probably do this as most of those droppables are going to end up being running backs. So this is probably going to be an 11 running back build. It may be less because I'm using early picks on running backs. I already took Ramondre, probably considering at least one running back here with this pick. So if I end up taking 3 running backs to start, or even 2, I may cut that down to 9 or 10. But the point remains, you're still probably wanting to go running back heavy here, and the WoRP backs it up. So back to the WoRP chart. Here you go, running backs versus receivers. It just doesn't make sense to back off on this value, especially given that essentially we've had just as many taken in our league. Coming back around, I'm going to start getting into, I'm taking running backs where others are going to be looking for running backs. The teams that took a 0 or hero RB approach that have gone 2 receivers, 3 receivers, 4 receivers even, those teams are going to be the ones that are going to start taking the running backs that I may look at as more in this flat range right here, I kind of want to be done there, because basically once you get to this point outside of the top 24, but actually as it drops off right into here, once you get past this point, it's all about opportunity. That's where you're going to go. I'm going to stash a bunch of bodies, and I don't necessarily need to grab RB40. RB60 is the same exact thing from a WoRP perspective, because they're going to need opportunity for them to capture any WoRP during the season. So that is what I'm thinking here. Nothing else is into consideration. There's not a tight end I would take. Quarterbacks obviously off the board. Real quick look at the quarterback ADP in terms of what's available in our league thus far. I mean, you're down to Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Sam Howell, Brock Purdy, Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Jimmy G, Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield. Pretty much the only guys left that are going to be starters. So for me, right here with J.K. Dobbins out due to his bye week, given that it's point per carry, this is probably the shot where I'm willing to stack on Kenneth Walker. Probably leading Dameon Pierce over Miles Sanders. So really the three considerations here were, obviously Devontae Smith has been an outlier, usually gone by this point because we're sitting here at pick 60, 61. So Smitty there at pick 47 is a consideration. The only other potential, if I didn't take him, would be to take two running backs. So it's between three players: Ken Walker, Dameon Pierce, Devontae Smith. And this is kind of a crossroads for me, right? Because I know the way that the league's going to value receiver. They're going to keep hitting them. Got a bunch of receivers that are going to go off the board after me. Most likely we're going to be down in this range. And can I really see, I mean, I'm going to be forced into taking some receivers in this range just because it's going to get so flat at running back. I'm going to need some innings eaters at receiver in this range. I'm just going to have them. Like, there's going to be ones where I'm to selectively take some shots in there. So really this comes down to, is there a world where Devontae Smith hits something higher than where he was last year, right? Like, here's where he was last year, talking about 0.87 WoRP. He's got to probably get into this range for it to make sense for me to take him over to these guys, right? So right here is the range of running back we're looking at right now. Talking about one win over replacement, pretty much, if you're taking the innings eaters like Dameon Pierce and Ken Walker, right? This is probably where they're going to live. So if you just think about it from that perspective, how am I impacting my draft a little bit more? I mean, I need basically here from Devontae Smith to make it worth the pick. So I'm going to gamble. This is how I play Dynasty. I look at receivers in the Smitty range, and I'm usually going to pivot downwards when his value is peaked in Dynasty. And I'm going to do the exact same here now that we're in Scott Fishbowl. I think it's also going to create a different team. I'm not sure there's going to be any other teams where they're going to say they started three running backs and three quarterbacks. So we're going to see how it goes, but I'm going to lock in those two picks. We're going to go up to make draft pick. First pick, we are going to lock in Kenneth Walker at 512. And the second pack, we are going to lock in Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce locked in at 601. So we'll be on the clock, 7:12, 8:01 turn. It'll be interesting to see what the rest of the league does. Does it run a little bit on running backs and quarterbacks here in the next 22 picks? We will see. Obviously, I'm putting this out there, so I'm not sure if anybody in my league is watching, but if they are, I'm kind of giving away what I'm going to do. So through 6 rounds, 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, drafting religiously based on the WoRP, and I think it's going to be a unique build. So we will see what happens as we get to round 7 and round 8. Be chill, everyone.